Polling stations are open in Mauritania as the country elects a successor to President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz, the man credited for bringing stability to the country. People in Turkey's largest city go back to the polls on Sunday to vote in a rerun of Istanbul's mayoral election after the opposition victory was annulled. And the Iranian military issues a stern warning to the US, saying that any aggression against them will have serious consequences for US interests in the whole region. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First, polling stations are open in Mauritania for a vote which, for the very first time, will see an elected president complete his mandate and hand the baton to an elected successor. Well, President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz is standing down, and he's credited by many for reforming and stabilizing the West African nation. Well, this issue of the country's stability as well as the economy have been front and center on the campaign trail. Our France 24 team has more now on who's in the running.
It's a big day for Mauritania. The country is holding its first election since it gained independence in 1960. This voter admits she has high expectations.
We want a president who will fix social injustice, someone who will ensure more fairness and equality.
According to the World Bank, Mauritania has seen significant growth since 2008, and the poverty rate has fallen from 44 to 33% in the past 10 years. There's been little improvement in unemployment levels, however, which has affected the country's youth, including this street vendor in particular.
I'm going to vote. It's the first time because Mauritania is suffering. Young people are mobilized because the country is suffering. Mauritanians are tired. Look at all these youth. There's no work. There's nothing.
Other Mauritanians say the new government should prioritize improving governance.
We want a president who takes care of his people, who makes sure his people have enough, works towards a better future, someone who gives back everything that has been stolen from us, our businesses, hospitals and land.
Some of the country's poorest citizens have left rural zones for the southern suburbs of Nouakchott. Yet even outside the capital, this family, which is living in a makeshift shelter, says they're lacking the most basic resources.
All I'm asking the Mauritanian president for is land. It's a right, and we want electricity and water. I'm going to vote, but the president has to help us. Otherwise, I'll never vote again.
Voter participation is one of the key stakes in Saturday's election. Outgoing President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz seized power in a coup in 2008, though he's agreed to step down and respect the two-term limit.
Now, people across Istanbul are going back to the polls on Sunday to vote in a rerun of the city's municipal elections. Well, that's after the opposition's narrow victory in what is Turkey's largest city was annulled. The country's electoral commission cited irregularities. Well, the winning candidate back in March was Ekrem İmamoğlu from the opposition CHP party. Well, he's hoping he's going to repeat his victory. France 24's Shona Bhattacharya has more now from Istanbul.
Ekrem İmamoğlu's supporters say they were robbed of their right to democracy. Now they hope to widen the gap with his rival next Sunday and confirm the CHP candidate as Istanbul's new mayor after the Supreme Election Board here in Turkey canceled the March 31st results.
First of all, we want democracy and respect. This goes beyond winning the municipality.
Everything will be okay for our kids, for our future. Everything should be okay.
Siz de toplu ulaşımdan bedava
Meanwhile, President Erdogan's AK Party has taken a page out of the CHP's playbook. This time around, Binali Yildirim has more concrete proposals for the city, as well as a greater on-the-ground presence with neighborhood rallies like this one, where men and women are separated by a barrier.
I believe we will win more votes. If God's willing, he'll do many beautiful things. We will win.
We trust him. We know what he's done in his career. That's why we want him to continue.
A recent poll puts Binali Yildirim behind Ekrem İmamoğlu by 9 points. Now, the two major questions for Sunday's election remain turnout and the Kurdish vote. The jailed leader of the PKK, the Kurdish armed group, told supporters to remain neutral days after the former leader of the pro-Kurdish HDP, who's also behind bars, called on Kurdish voters to cast their ballot for Ekrem İmamoğlu.
France 24's Shona Bhattacharya reporting there from Istanbul. Now, the Iranian military has issued a warning to the United States, saying that any aggression against the Islamic Republic would have serious consequences for U.S. interests across the region. Well, this comes the day after the U.S. President Donald Trump explained why he decided to call off military strikes on Iran at the 11th hour in what would have been retaliation for Iran shooting down an unmanned U.S. drone. President Trump said the likely deaths of 150 Iranians would have been disproportionate. France 24's Camille Nedlek has more.
He claims he showed restraint after calling off retaliatory airstrikes in Iran after it shot down a US drone. President Donald Trump said the last-minute step-down was to avoid loss of life.
I thought about it for a second. I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead. And I didn't like it.
Democrats claim they weren't informed of the potential strike, but reacted with relief to the news that it was called off.
A strike of that amount of collateral damage would be very provocative, and I'm glad the president did not take that. We think there are many options that are not what they call kinetic, that is to say a strike on the country that might be more useful.
Washington insists the drone, similar to this one, was in international airspace when it was shot down. But Iran says the drone violated its airspace, making it a fair target. Tehran released this footage on Friday of debris it says it pulled from its waters, and claimed it too had shown restraint by hitting the drone instead of a nearby plane.
The aircraft was manned and had around 35 crew members. Well, we could have targeted that plane. It was in our right to do so. And yes, it was American. But we didn't do it.
It comes after weeks of heightened tension with Iran over potential sabotage of oil tankers in the Gulf and its failure to denuclearize.
Now, the Supreme Court in Spain has sentenced 5 men to 15 years in prison for raping a teenage girl back in 2016. The group called themselves the Wolf Pack, and they shared videos of their attack on social media shortly thereafter. Well, these events and the original less serious sentence of sexual assault sparked widespread protests in Spain. France 24's Yuka Roya tells us more.
A victory for these protesters saying no to what they call patriarchal justice. Spain's highest court has sentenced the so-called Wolf Pack to 15 years in prison for rape, overturning an earlier, lighter conviction of sexual assault. Some, though, say it doesn't go far enough.
I think the ruling was right, but it's not enough. It took them 3 years to admit it was rape and not sexual assault.
Supreme Court judges accepted the victim's argument that she was gang raped and that shock and fear had prevented her from fighting back.
The victim was in a situation where she was so scared, she was stupefied and became submissive. It was submission, not consent.
The defendant's lawyer had argued that the men had consensual sex with the girl.
What did the plaintiff do in front of them so that they would know that she was in a state of shock and that they were having sex without her consent? How did they know that? Did she say something, verbalize something, make a gesture? No.
The 5 men, who included a serving police officer, forced themselves on a girl who was then 18 at a bull running festival in 2016. Last year, An appeals court upheld an initial district court verdict which cleared the men of gang rape and convicted them of a lesser offence of sexual abuse. The controversial ruling sparked protests across Spain, which intensified when the attackers were freed on bail. Under Spanish law, proof of violence or intimidation must be presented for an attack like this to be considered rape. The Supreme Court has now accepted that the girl's ordeal met that requirement. The government has promised to review the laws.
Well, that brings us up to date with the world news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.